Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The last stretch of daylight lay weak across the Wyoming frontier, a pale band of fading gold slipping behind the line of dark pines as Cole Ransom made his way along the narrow path leading to his cabin. Snow was still falling, not in thick waves, but in a steady drift that gathered on his coat and hat as he walked. The cold pressed into everything: the fence rails, the frozen ground, the breath leaving his mouth in slow white clouds. Cole kept a quiet, steady pace, the kind of walk he used when nothing urgent waited on him. For almost 5 years he had lived alone out here, tending his small herd, mending his fences, and working each day with a calm routine that kept his mind from drifting into memories he didn't want. He had lost his wife in a violent break-in at their former ranch outside Laramie, and the guilt of not reaching her in time had followed him like a shadow. The cabin he built in the pines wasn't meant for comfort. It was meant for silence, a place where no one knew him, and where he didn't have to explain why he kept to himself. His mission now was simple: survive the winter, keep his herd alive, and stay out of trouble. No more fights, no more towns, no more chances of getting someone else hurt because of him. As he approached the corral, something in the snow caught his eye. Small tracks, not animal, and not steady enough to belong to anyone in good condition. The steps were short, uneven, and wandered slightly as if whoever made them had stumbled more than walked. Cole's muscles tightened in quiet alertness. Out here, unexpected company almost never meant anything good. He followed the trail slowly, keeping one hand near the knife, sheathed at his belt, though he didn't draw it. The last thing he wanted was to frighten someone who might already be hanging on by a thread. Each step brought him closer to the far post where the shape of a person lay half buried in snow, unmoving. Cole moved forward cautiously, his breath tightening with a mix of worry and suspicion. When he knelt beside the figure, he brushed snow away from his shoulder and saw a young Apache woman curled into herself, her skin tinted with cold, her dress torn across the ribs and thigh, the beaded fringe frozen stiff. Her braid was tangled and stuck with bits of ice. Her eyelids fluttered as she sensed his presence. For a moment Cole froze, unsure how she would react if she woke suddenly. He knew the history between settlers and Apache people in these parts, most of it violent, shaped by fear on both sides. But none of that mattered when someone was this close to freezing. When her eyes finally opened, she looked up at him in a dazed, exhausted way, too weak to defend herself even if she tried. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak. "I just need a place to stay for one night," she whispered, the words thin and strained. Cole felt something shift inside him, an instinctive pull toward helping her, the same instinct he had suppressed for years because caring for anyone always led to pain. But leaving her here wasn't an option. She wouldn't survive an hour. "You're freezing," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Her breathing hitched in fear when he put his arms under her to lift her, and he felt the tension in her muscles even through the cold. He spoke low, steady. "I'm just getting you out of the snow. Nothing else." She didn't resist after that. Her head rested weakly against his chest, and he could feel how light she was through his coat, as if starvation had taken more from her than the cold ever could. He carried her across the yard toward the cabin, his boots thudding against the packed snow. Inside, the air was cold but dry. The stove sat empty, a few logs stacked nearby. He set her gently on a small bench near the stove and crouched to light a fire. His hands moved quickly, dry, kindling flint, coaxing a flame until warm orange light began filling the room. The woman, Saya, though he didn't know her name yet, held her hands out toward the heat. They were shaking uncontrollably, her fingertips discolored from the cold. Cole grabbed a wool blanket from his bunk and draped it around her shoulders. She flinched at the first touch, eyes widening in a quick flash of panic. Cole paused, letting her see his hands, letting her breathe. "You're safe here," he said in a steady tone, his voice calm but firm. "Just warm up." Her breathing slowed little by little. Now that the fire provided enough light, Cole finally got a better look at her condition. Her cheeks were scraped. A bruise marked her jaw, and the torn sections of her dress revealed dark marks along her ribs. She had been hurt recently, badly. Her necklace had snapped, leaving only a few beads dangling from a leather strand. Cole felt a familiar bitterness rise in his chest. The same bitterness he'd felt years ago when he arrived too late to save his wife. The same helpless anger at men who hurt because no one stopped them. He stepped back, trying to think clearly. "Can you drink?" he asked. She nodded weakly. He filled a tin cup with water and handed it to her slowly, making each motion visible so she wouldn't think he was reaching for a weapon or grabbing at her. As she drank, Cole leaned back against the table, studying her with a mix of caution and concern. Who was she running from? How far had she come? And would whoever hurt her be searching these woods? He didn't ask yet. She was barely hanging on to consciousness, and pressing her for answers would only add to her fear. But inside, Cole's thoughts ran tight and focused. If someone dangerous was tracking her, he needed to know. He needed to prepare. And if those men followed her tracks onto his land, he couldn't let what happened in Laramie happen again. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters gently. Saya turned her head toward the sound, her body tensing again. Cole stepped between her and the wall instinctively, not touching her, not crowding her, just placing himself in the line of whatever frightened her. Her eyes met his briefly, and he saw something there. Fear, exhaustion, but also the faintest trace of trust, or at least recognition that he wasn't going to harm her. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, her voice barely stronger than before. "Thank you," she whispered. Cole didn't respond right away. He just nodded once, then added another log to the stove, the fire growing brighter and warmer. He didn't know who she was yet. He didn't know why she was here. But one thing was already clear. He had a responsibility now, one he hadn't expected and wasn't prepared for, but one he couldn't turn away from. Whatever came next, they would face it inside these walls. For tonight at least, she wasn't alone. The storm eased slightly by morning, leaving a low gray sky that pressed heavy over the pines and cast the cabin in a dim, cold light. Cole woke early out of habit, the same way he did every day, no matter how late he'd worked the night before. But today felt different the moment he opened his eyes. The quiet inside the cabin wasn't the simple quiet he was used to. Someone else was breathing. Someone else was alive in his space. He pushed himself up slowly, careful not to startle her. Saya was sitting near the stove, wrapped tightly in the blanket he'd given her, her eyes fixed on the flames as if they were the only thing keeping her present. Her face still showed the fatigue of the night before. Dark circles, tightness around her jaw, but the color had returned to her skin a little. Her hair, braided but messy from her collapse in the snow, hung down her back with a few loose feathers shifting whenever she breathed. She noticed him watching and went still, waiting to see how he moved. Cole kept his posture relaxed, his hands open, the same slow, steady manner he used around frightened animals and skittish horses. "You warm enough?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded once. "Better." Cole stood and reached for his coat. "I have to check the livestock. I won't go far." He said it plainly, but he meant it as reassurance. He wasn't leaving her. Saya didn't answer. She simply pulled the blanket closer and kept her eyes on him, trying to decide if she could trust that he wasn't walking away for good. He paused long enough for her to see he wasn't rushing out, then stepped into the cold. Outside, the air bit at his face in sharp little stings. The corral was quiet, the horses stamping frost off their hooves, steam rising from their nostrils. He checked each animal, ran his hands along their legs, made sure no predators had come near. Everything looked normal, but the tracks remained, the ones he'd followed last night. He walked the perimeter again, scanning the tree line, his instincts on edge. Whoever had hurt her hadn't been careful. Their footprints were deep and irregular, not the careful pattern of hunters. These were men who rushed, men who grabbed, men who didn't expect anyone to intervene. He felt that old spark of anger press against his ribs, the kind he tried not to feel anymore. When he returned inside, he found Saya standing on her own now, steadying herself by the edge of the table. Her dress hung unevenly, one side torn all the way to her hip, exposing bruises on her thigh and ribs. She held it together with her hand, chin lifted as if refusing to be ashamed of the state she was in. Cole looked away briefly to give her dignity, then placed a folded wool shirt on the table. "You can use this if it helps with the cold," he said. She hesitated, then took the shirt, running her fingers over the fabric. She seemed surprised he didn't insist or look too long. She stayed behind the bunk curtain change, and Cole turned fully toward the window until she stepped out again, his old shirt hanging past her hips. She sat near the fire again, holding her injured rib lightly. He poured water into the tin cup and set it by her side. "You talk when you feel ready," he said. "No rush." For a long moment, she said nothing. Her eyes stayed on the floor, her breath calm but tight. Then, finally she spoke. "They traded me. More than once." Her fingers trembled slightly as she pressed them into the blanket. "I ran when I could." Cole kept still, his back straight, his face quiet. He didn't interrupt. "I didn't know where I was going," she continued. "Just away." Her voice held no dramatics, no attempt for sympathy. Only fact, spoken by someone who had been living with danger too long. Cole felt the weight of her words settle heavy in the space between them. "Did they follow you?" he asked. Her nod was small, but it was enough. He turned slightly toward the window again, calculating distances in his mind, thinking of the old trail south of the ridge. "They'll come this way if they're tracking you," he said. "Storm slowed them last night. It won't today." Saya watched him carefully, studying the way his jaw tightened, the way he checked the rifle leaning near the wall. She seemed to understand that he wasn't frightened, just preparing himself. "Why help me?" she asked quietly. Cole paused, the answer sitting uncomfortably in his chest. "Because leaving you in the snow wasn't something I could live with," he said. "That's all." It wasn't the full truth. He saw pieces of his past in her fear, in her bruises, in the trembling edge of her voice. But he wasn't ready to say more. Saya's eyes softened, though she kept her expression guarded. She picked up a small thread kit from the shelf and started stitching the worst tear at her dress, working slowly but with experienced hands. She moved with the posture of someone who had learned to survive through small tasks, fixing what she could, holding herself together. Cole watched her work, noticing how she stayed alert to every sound outside, flinching slightly whenever the wind hit the shutters. "You don't have to be afraid here," he said. She didn't look up, but her voice lowered. "I've heard that before." It wasn't true then. Cole exhaled slowly. He understood that. "There's no one else here," he said. "Just us." For a few seconds, she said nothing. Then she set the stitched dress aside and finally looked at him, not as a threat, not as someone to fear, but as a man she was beginning to read. "What now?" she asked. "Now," Cole said, pulling another log for the fire. "We make sure the cabin holds. If they come, we'll see them first." Saya didn't argue. She simply stood and walked closer to the stove, the fire warming her face. Her next words were quiet but certain. "I'll help." Cole nodded once. He didn't smile, but something in his chest loosened, a feeling he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. They weren't a team yet. They weren't safe yet, but they were no longer alone. The wind picked up again by afternoon, not as a full storm, but enough to rattle the shutters and push thin drafts across the floorboards. Inside the cabin, the air felt warmer than it had the night before, yet the tension between the walls stayed tight and alert. Both Cole and Saya felt it, though neither said anything at first. Cole worked quietly at the table, sharpening a hunting knife with slow, precise strokes. Each scrape of the blade against the stone echoed softly in the cramped room. He wasn't doing it to intimidate her, just preparing the same way he did when a long winter or a bad storm was coming. But Saya watched him with cautious attention, her eyes following the movement of his hands, the glint of the metal, the steadiness of his grip. After a moment, he paused. "You all right with this?" he asked without looking up. Saya hesitated. "Yes, I've seen worse." Her tone wasn't bitter, just true. Cole nodded once and kept working, though slower now. His movements stayed calm, offering her time to settle into the quiet. Her dress, freshly stitched along the worst tear, lay folded near the bunk. She still wore his wool shirt, its sleeves rolled to her elbows, the hem brushing her thighs. She stood near the stove, sorting the herbs she'd found on his shelf into small piles. Ones for pain, ones for swelling, ones that did nothing but smell sharp and clean. You know how to use those, Cole said, noticing the way she separated each root with practiced care. My mother taught me, she replied. Before. She stopped, the rest of the sentence falling away. Cole didn't push for more. Instead, he set the knife down and stepped outside for a moment to check the daylight. Saya followed with her eyes until the door shut behind him. The familiar unease pooled in her stomach, an instinct that told her every time someone stepped out, they might not come back. She tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself that he had said he wasn't leaving. Still, fear was a hard habit to break. Outside, Cole moved through the snow near the corral with careful steps, scanning the trees for movement. The tracks from yesterday were half buried, but still visible. No new ones, but that didn't comfort him. Men who hunted people tended to move at night, using the dark as cover. His thoughts sharpened as he walked, the memory of failing to protect his wife still driving every quiet decision he made. He wouldn't let that happen again, not under his roof. When he returned inside, Saya's shoulders lowered a little, her body easing at the simple proof that he'd kept his word. Nothing out there yet, he said, hanging his coat by the door. She nodded, though her eyes still followed the window. Cole took a seat at the table and motioned toward the knife. You should know how to hold it, in case I'm not close when you need it. Saya approached slowly, studying his face for any sign of threat. Instead, she saw only patience. She sat across from him, her hands visible on the table. He placed the knife between them. Go on, pick it up. She hesitated, but eventually reached for it, her fingers curling around the handle. It was heavier than she expected, and she adjusted her grip instinctively. Cole leaned forward slightly. Don't squeeze too hard. You lose control that way. He reached out, hovering his hand over hers without touching it first, a silent question. She gave the smallest nod. Cole adjusted her wrist gently, his fingertips brushing her skin for half a second. Like this, he said. Straight. Firm. She repeated the motion several times, her movements becoming smoother. Every time she looked up, Cole was watching, not in judgment, not in appraisal, just making sure she understood. You're good at learning quick, he said. I've had to be, she answered. Their eyes held for a brief moment before she set the knife down. The tension between them shifted then, not the fearful kind from before, but something quieter, a growing recognition that they were beginning to trust each other in slow, steady steps. Later, they worked together reinforcing the door. Cole hammered the plank while Saya held it steady, her hands gripping the rough wood with focus. Each strike of the hammer sent a jolt through the cabin, but she didn't flinch. She asked, Why do you live out here alone? Cole paused, the hammer resting against the doorframe. His jaw tightened before he answered. Peace is easier when nobody's near enough to lose. Saya lowered her eyes, understanding the weight behind the words without asking more. I used to live near people too, she said quietly. It didn't keep me safe. He looked at her for a moment, then returned to the work without forcing a reply from her. As dusk settled, the cabin glowed with lantern light. Saya prepared a small pot of stew with the ingredients she found in his stores. The smell filled the room slowly, simple, warm, grounding. Cole sat nearby, rubbing the cold from his hands. When she handed him a bowl, their fingers brushed lightly. She didn't pull away this time, and he didn't pretend not to notice. They ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that said both had lived through things they didn't want to explain in one night. After they finished, Saya stood near the window, staring into the dark woods. They'll come, she murmured. Cole moved to stand beside her, close enough for her to feel the heat from his shoulder. Then we'll be ready, he said. She turned slightly toward him, her voice steady. You don't even know me. Cole kept his gaze on the tree-line. I know enough. She breathed out slowly, the tension in her body easing just a little. The wind pushed against the cabin, but inside, a new kind of safety took root, thin, fragile, but real enough for both of them to feel. They were no longer strangers. Not anymore. Snow thickened again by morning, drifting across the yard in slow waves that made the world outside look even quieter than usual. The cold pressed against the cabin walls, slipping through every small seam, but inside the fire burned strong. Saya stood near it first, warming her hands as Cole pulled on his coat to start the day's work. "You stay inside until I check the ridge," he said, fastening the last button. Saya didn't argue, but her eyes followed him the whole way to the door, her shoulders tightening as if she wasn't sure he'd return. Cole noticed and paused before stepping out. "I'll be back," he said simply. He didn't say it to reassure her. He said it because he meant it. Outside, he walked the length of the corral, boots sinking into the new snow. The horses were restless, their breath steaming in the cold air, shifting from foot to foot. Animals sensed danger before people did. Cole watched the tree line carefully, checking for broken branches, disturbed snow, anything that didn't belong. He found nothing new, but the land felt watched in that quiet, unnatural way he trusted. He had lived through too much to ignore subtle signs. Inside, Saya moved through the cabin with a sense of purpose she didn't have 2 days before. She sorted firewood into neat piles, swept away the bits of snow blown in through the draft, and checked the herbs she had separated. She still flinched at every hard sound outside, but the panic didn't grip her as tightly now. When Cole returned, she let out a breath she'd been holding without realizing it. "No tracks yet," he said, hanging his coat. "But they're out there. I can feel it." Saya nodded. She didn't dismiss his instinct. She had learned the same way he had. Pain teaches faster than anything else. She approached the table where he had laid out rope, nails, and extra planks. "Tell me what to do," she said. Cole studied her for a moment, not to question her willingness, but to judge whether her ribs could handle lifting and bending. "You can help with the seams," he said. "Sacks by the shelf. Stuff them into the cracks. Keep the draft out. Makes it harder for sound to escape too." She got to work immediately. Cole grabbed a hammer and began reinforcing the frame around the door. Each strike echoed through the cabin. Saya paused at the first loud impact, her breath catching, but when she saw Cole's steady posture, she forced herself to keep going. As she pressed the sacks firmly into the gaps, her sleeve slid back, revealing a bruise on her forearm. Cole noticed it once the hammering stopped. "They did that to you?" he asked quietly. Saya kept her hands busy. "Yes." "That the worst of it?" he asked. "No," she said, voice flat and honest. Cole didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. He had seen women brought into small-town clinics with the same kind of bruises, the same guarded eyes, the same silence when asked who hurt them. He felt the old ache in his chest again, the one that came whenever he remembered how he hadn't arrived in time for his wife. "We'll keep you safe," he said. "Even if they come close, they won't touch you again." She stopped working long enough to look at him, her breathing steady but emotional in a quiet, restrained way. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Cole leaned the hammer against the wall. "Because no one helped when my wife needed it. I live with that every day." He held her gaze, not forcing sympathy or pity, only truth. "I don't run from that anymore." Saya swallowed, absorbing the weight of what he'd shared. She didn't say she was sorry. She understood that loss didn't want apologies. It wanted something steady to replace it. She returned to her task, but her movements were calmer now, grounded. Later, as they worked side by side near the window, Cole handed her the small hunting knife he had shown her yesterday. "If anyone comes close, you keep this on you," he said. Saya held it with both hands, her fingers settling into the grip he'd taught her. "I won't freeze again," she said softly. "Not like before." He nodded once. "Good." As dusk approached, they stepped outside together to gather more wood. The cold air stung their faces. Saya walked slowly, favoring her ribs, but she insisted on helping. She bent to pick up a piece of split pine when her foot slipped on a thin patch of ice. Cole caught her by the forearm before she fell, steadying her with one hand on her waist. She stiffened, expecting pain or force, but Cole's grip was controlled, gentle, protective. His breath hovered in the cold air near her cheek. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the wind. He released her slowly, making sure she was balanced before stepping back. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. Something quiet passed between them, acknowledgement, maybe, or trust forming in small pieces. Back inside, the cabin filled with warm light again. Saya took the stew pot and stirred it with careful movements, wincing slightly when her ribs pulled. Cole watched from the table. "You should rest," he said. "I will," she answered, "after you eat." He didn't argue. She ladled stew into bowls, the steam rising between them. When he took the bowl from her hands, their fingers touched, barely, but enough to feel the warmth of the fire on her skin. They ate without speaking. The silence felt different tonight. Less tense, more like two people sharing the same breath and same space, because they trusted each other enough to let the silence be what it was. When they finished, Cole stood and checked the locks one more time. "They might not come tonight," he said, "but they're close." Saya stepped closer to the fire, her shadow soft against the wall. "If they come," she said quietly, "I won't hide behind you. I'll stand with you." Cole met her eyes. "I know," he said. Outside, the wind pushed against the cabin again, but inside, the fire held steady, and so did the two people learning how to survive together. The cold settled harder the next morning, the kind that made the boards of the cabin creak under their own stiffness. The sky outside looked washed out and heavy, as if holding back another storm. Cole woke before dawn, his instincts pushing him to move quietly through the small space, checking the locks and glancing out the frost-covered window every few minutes. Saya stirred on the bunk, shifting under the blanket. Her ribs still ached. He could see in the way she held herself when she sat up, but she pushed through the pain without complaint. She had lived too long in survival mode to let an injury slow her. Cole placed a tin cup of warm water on the table. "Drink something first," he said. She nodded and reached for it, her fingers brushing his briefly. She didn't pull back this time, just took the cup and held it close. Cole stepped away, pulling on his coat. "I'll check the ridge," he said. "I won't be long." The tension in her shoulders rose for a moment, but she forced herself to breathe through it. "I can work while you're gone," she said. "I won't just sit." "You don't have to," he replied. "I want to," she insisted, her voice steady. He gave a short, approving nod before stepping out into the cold. Outside, the world looked deceptively peaceful. Hard-packed snow stretched across the yard, broken only by the tracks he and Saya had left the previous evening. Cole crossed toward the tree line, watching for movement. The forest beyond the ridge remained quiet, but it wasn't a comforting quiet. It was the kind predators used when they were close. He scanned the ground and found new disruption. Twigs snapped recently, snow disturbed in uneven patches, faint impressions of horses. Not from yesterday. Fresh. His jaw tightened, a familiar weight pressing into his chest. Danger wasn't theoretical anymore. It was closer than either of them wanted to admit. He returned to the cabin with slower, deliberate steps. Saya had been working the entire time he was outside. She had arranged the firewood into neat stacks, checked the herbs on the shelf again, and sorted the last of Cole's dried food into small bundles. She moved carefully, her ribs stiff, but she kept going. Cole entered with the cold still clinging to him. "They're close," he said plainly. Saya stopped mid-motion. "How close?" "Not at the door, but near enough that we need to be ready." She absorbed that with a quiet, steady breath. She didn't cry, didn't panic. She just stood there, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "What do we do?" she asked. Cole placed the bundle of rope on the table. "We reinforce again, and you carry the knife from now on." She nodded. They worked together through the morning. Cole sealed more cracks around the windows while Saya packed small essentials into a sack. Herbs, water, a torn scrap of cloth she'd kept from something she cared about before all of this. She didn't say what it meant, and Cole didn't ask. When the doorframe was secure for now, Cole sat down beside her on the bench to show her more defensive tricks. "Hold it higher," he said, lifting her hand slightly with two fingers. "Aim for the side if someone grabs you. Never forward. It gives them your arm." She steadied herself, repeating the motion until her wrist stopped shaking. "You're learning fast," Cole said. Saya's eyes met his briefly. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," he answered without hesitation. Her expression softened just a bit. One small sign she believed him. By afternoon, they stepped outside to gather more wood before the next cold front hit. Saya followed Cole slowly, watching everything with alert eyes. The snow had stopped falling, but the air felt sharper, holding a wrong kind of stillness. As they reached the woodpile, Saya suddenly froze. She pointed at the ridge. "Do you see that?" Cole narrowed his eyes. Far off, barely noticeable, smoke rose in a thin column between the trees. Too controlled to be an accident. Too close to ignore. "That's a camp," Cole said. "Could be them." Saya's breath caught, her hand tightening around the rope she held. The fear was there, raw and clear, but she didn't collapse into it. She stood straighter, grounding herself. "I won't go back," she said. "Not alive." "You won't be taken at all," Cole replied. His voice wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simple, steady, and serious. She didn't know why, but it was the first time since she had escaped that she actually believed that promise from someone. Inside the cabin again, dusk settled quickly, dimming the room. Saya cooked a small pot of stew, standing close to the stove for warmth. Cole sat at the table, cleaning the rifle with methodical precision. "You're sure we're safe tonight?" she asked. "Safe enough," he said. "They don't move in the open after dark unless they're desperate." "And if they do?" she asked. "Then they meet me first." She swallowed hard. "You would get hurt." "Maybe," he said, "but I'm not letting them inside." Saya stared at him for a long moment, her eyes full of something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Trust mixed with something warmer. She walked to the table slowly and placed a hand on his forearm. "You protect me without asking anything back. Men don't do that." Cole looked down at her hand for a moment, then at her. "I'm not trying to take anything from you." "I know," she whispered. He felt the tremor in her fingers. She wasn't just afraid of the men outside. She was afraid of losing whatever safety she'd finally found here. Cole turned his arm slightly, so her hand rested in his instead, not gripping her, just holding. A small connection, quiet but real. Later, after they had eaten and the fire had settled into a steady glow, Saya lay on the bunk while Cole sat against the stove, the rifle within reach. "Will you sleep?" she asked softly. "I'll rest," he said. "You sleep. Your ribs need it." "What about you?" she whispered. "I'll be here," he answered. "You're not alone tonight." Her eyes softened. She watched him for a moment longer before letting her breathing slow. Cole remained awake, listening for every sound outside. They weren't safe yet, but they were together, and tonight, that mattered more than anything else. Night pulled across the Wyoming woods early, stretching long shadows over the snow until the landscape looked stripped of color. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low but steady. Cole had fed it twice already, keeping the room warm enough for Saya to sleep. He sat on the floor with his back to the stove, rifle leaning against his knee, listening, not to the fire but to the woods. He didn't like the silence tonight. It felt too tight, too watchful. Saya lay on the bunk, half covered in the blankets, her breathing slow but uneven. Every few minutes she shifted, a soft groan slipping out when her bruised ribs pulled. Even in sleep, she didn't fully rest. Cole watched her for a moment. She had survived too much for someone so young. 25 should not look this tired. He didn't know everything she'd been through, but he knew enough. She'd been traded, treated as property, hunted when she escaped. Those men didn't abandon what they thought they owned. And Cole didn't forget how he failed his wife years ago. He would not let anything happen again, not under his roof. A sudden snap echoed from the woods. Cole's head lifted immediately, body tensing in one quick control motion. He didn't stand yet. He just listened. Saya woke instantly, eyes opening wide. "That was close," she whispered. Cole nodded once. "Stay quiet." She slipped off the bunk slowly, her feet landing softly on the ground. She pulled the wool shirt tighter around her body and moved closer to him, her hands slightly shaking but steadying as she stood behind him. Another sound came, 2 faint crunches of snow, measured and deliberate. Cole whispered, barely audible, "One rider." Maybe 2. Saya's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers curled into the blanket she held around her shoulders. Cole moved to the small north-facing window and looked through the narrow corner that wasn't covered by the reinforcing plank. The moon gave just enough light to outline a shadow. One figure, on foot, moving slowly along the ridgeline. He watched the man stop, turn toward the cabin, and linger too long. "He's looking for the tracks," Cole said quietly. "He's guessing we're here, but he's not sure yet." Saya stepped closer until her shoulder brushed his arm. It wasn't planned. She just wanted to feel anchored to something solid. "What do we do?" she whispered. "Wait," Cole said. "If he comes closer, I'll handle it. But he might move on." She stood perfectly still beside him, eyes fixed on the same narrow slit in the window. Minutes dragged slowly. The woods stayed silent except for the occasional wind pushing snow off the branches. Then the figure turned, heading back into the trees, disappearing beyond the ridge. Cole let out a breath he'd been holding for too long. "He'll go back to whoever he's with," he said, "which means they'll circle wider tomorrow." Saya lowered her head, gripping the blanket even tighter. "I don't want you hurt because of me," she said quietly. Cole turned to face her fully. His voice was low but firm. "If those men come here, it's on them. Not you." She shook her head slightly. "They never stop. You don't know what they're like." "I know enough," he replied. Her eyes lifted to his. She was scared, yes, but she wasn't breaking. There was strength beneath the fear, a stubborn will to survive that he respected. Cole walked to the door, checked the lock again, then added another piece of wood to the stove. Saya followed him, moving slowly due to her ribs. "Sit," he said softly. "I'll heat the herbs." She sat on the bench near the table, watching him grind the dried herbs she'd sorted earlier. It struck her that he remembered each instruction she'd given earlier in the week. How long to heat them, how much water to add, how to wrap the cloth. Most men ignored women's knowledge. Cole treated it like fact. When he placed the warm cloth against her ribs, she flinched but didn't pull away. "Sorry," he murmured. "It helps," she whispered. He kept the pressure gentle and steady. She watched his hands, rough from work, scarred from old fights, steady even now when danger pressed close. "You're not afraid," she said quietly. "I am," Cole answered. "I just know how to move through it." She stared at him for a long moment, the fire lighting their faces with a soft glow. "I trust you," she said, the words leaving her before she could stop them. Cole slowly removed his hand from the cloth. He didn't look away from her. "You should sleep more," he said, not breaking eye contact. "We'll need strength tomorrow." "And you?" she asked. "I'll sleep when I can." She stood then, hesitating for a moment before placing the warm cloth over her ribs on her own. "You don't have to stay awake all night." He shook his head once. "I'm not letting anyone get close without me knowing." Saya stepped closer, close enough that he could see the faint trembling of her shoulders, the quiet bravery in her eyes. "You don't have to fight alone," she whispered. Cole's breath tightened slightly at her closeness. He didn't reach for her, didn't touch her, but he didn't step back either. "I'm used to doing things alone," he said softly. "I'm not," she replied, her voice barely above a breath. "Not anymore." For a few seconds, they stood in silence, the fire crackling quietly behind them. Cole finally glanced down, steadying himself. "You sleep," he said again, his voice rougher now, strained by the closeness. "I'll watch the ridge." She nodded slowly and returned to the bunk. Before lying down, she looked at him one more time. "Cole," she said. "Yeah. Thank you." He swallowed once and looked toward the window again. "Get some rest, Saya." She lay down, her breathing steadying as the fire warmed the cabin. Cole remained by the stove, rifle in hand, listening to the woods with sharp focus. Danger was close, but so was something else. A bond forming between them, quiet and steady, growing stronger with every hour they survived together. The morning came slowly, slipping through the cracks of the shutters in thin gray strips. Cole hadn't slept. He sat upright near the stove, rifle resting across his lap, eyes fixed on the window, even as the fire sank into glowing embers. His shoulders stayed tense, every muscle alert in a way that felt familiar, too familiar, like the nights he spent guarding his wife during the trouble in Laramie, guarding until he failed. He pushed that memory away the second he felt its surface. Saya woke with a soft groan, shifting carefully as her ribs pulled. She blinked against the dim light, her eyes landing on Cole still in the same position he'd held all night. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders and stepped closer. "You didn't sleep," she said. Cole shrugged slightly. "Didn't need to." She studied him quietly, recognizing the lie. She saw the way the skin under his eyes had darkened, the way his jaw clenched when he stretched his back. He wasn't invincible. He was exhausted. But she didn't press him. "What did you hear?" she asked. "They patrol the ridge," he said. "Didn't come close." Saya looked down, her breath catching. Relief mixed sharply with dread. "They'll come again." "Maybe," Cole said. "But we'll be ready." She didn't question the word "we." It felt natural now, like the two of them had been thrown into a single line of defense against the world outside. Saya spent the morning preparing the herbs again, boiling the ones that eased pain into a small pot. She moved slower than usual, but with determination. Each task gave her purpose, grounding her. Cole watched her from the table as he cleaned the rifle again. "You don't have to do all that today," he said. "I want to," she replied. "It keeps my hands steady." He understood that. Sometimes work was the only thing that calmed the mind. As she leaned over the pot, the wool shirt shifted slightly on her shoulders, revealing the bruising along her collarbone. It was worse in the daylight, dark and mottled, a map of violence. Cole looked away, not out of discomfort, but because he hated seeing it. He hated that someone had put those marks there and believed they had the right. Saya noticed his reaction. "They hurt me because they could," she said, not with self-pity, but with the flat truth of someone who had lived through it. "They thought no one would stop them." Cole's jaw tightened. "Someone should have." She nodded. "And you are, even though you don't know me." Cole set the rifle down. "I know enough," he said. "I know what they want, and I know what you deserve." Her breath shook, not in fear, but in something like gratitude mixed with disbelief. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her without wanting something in return. Around midday, the sky darkened again, heavy clouds gathering over the ridge. Saya stepped outside with Cole to bring in more wood before the next round of snow. The air was sharp, clean, the kind of cold that bit into skin. As she bent to pick up a log, she winced, pressing a hand to her ribs. Cole stepped toward her immediately. "Let me," he said. "I can still carry something," she insisted. He didn't argue. He just took the heaviest pieces and let her manage the smaller ones. They walked side by side toward the cabin, the snow crunching under their boots. Saya paused suddenly halfway across the yard. "You feel that?" she whispered. Cole froze. He lowered the wood in his arms and listened. The air held a faint tremor, a presence, the sense of movement far off in the trees. It wasn't sound exactly, but years of living alone in the wilderness had taught him to recognize when someone else's breath disturbed the stillness. "They're nearby," he said quietly. Saya's pulse quickened. "How close?" "Close enough to make choices," Cole said. She stepped closer unconsciously, seeking his steadiness. "What do we do?" she asked. "We stay inside. We keep quiet. And if they come to the door..." He exhaled slowly. "They'll have to get through me first." Saya swallowed hard, but she didn't break. She looked at him with that same mix of fear and trust that had been growing stronger each day. "You can let me go," she said suddenly. "Lead them away from you. I can run. Hide in the hills." Cole stared at her, his expression turning hard with disbelief. "You think I brought you inside to send you back out the minute danger got close?" "I don't want you hurt," she said. "I'm already hurt," he replied quietly, just not in a way they can see. The honesty in his tone silenced her. They stepped back into the cabin, locking the door behind them. Saya stood near the stove, her hands tight around the edge of the counter. Cole placed the wood down and scanned the windows again. "We have a few hours before they circle this way," he said. "What can I do?" she asked. Cole handed her the knife. "Keep this with you. Always." She nodded and tucked the blade into the fold of the wool shirt, the leather handle hidden beneath the fabric. Cole stepped closer, his voice going lower. "They won't get past me," he said. "Not while you're under my roof." Saya's breath trembled, her eyes lifting to meet his. She stepped in even closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth from her body mixing with the cold cabin air. "Why?" she whispered. Why risk so much for me? Cole didn't look away. He didn't soften the truth. Because you came to me half frozen and terrified, he said. Because you asked for one night. And because helping you feels like something worth fighting for. Her eyes filled with something deep, steady, and aching. She reached up and brushed her fingers lightly against his arm. You don't owe me anything. I know, he said. I'm choosing this. She held his gaze for a long, silent moment. Then she leaned in, her forehead resting gently against his chest. Cole didn't move at first, afraid to startle her, but when she stayed there breathing slow and close, he lifted a hand and placed it lightly on her back. It wasn't a romantic embrace. It was something quieter, heavier, a promise held in the warmth of two people who refused to leave each other behind. Outside, the snow began falling again, soft at first, then heavy, but inside the cabin, two people braced themselves for whatever tomorrow would bring. Together, the snow fell in slow, thick sheets the next morning, drifting against the cabin walls until the whole yard looked buried under a clean white blanket. Cole stood at the window before dawn, watching the trees with sharp focus, his rifle propped against the wall beside him. He had slept only an hour, maybe less, but exhaustion didn't matter anymore. This was the day everything would settle, one way or another. Behind him, Saya moved quietly across the floor, her steps soft, careful of her ribs. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and came to stand beside him, close enough that their arms brushed. You feel it too, she whispered. Yes, Cole answered. They're here. A faint tremor passed through her, but she didn't step back. She straightened her posture instead, breathing slow and steady. She had been running for so long that her first instinct was to flee, but today she stayed because he stayed. What do you want me to do? She asked. Stay on this side of the room, he said. Keep the knife close, but don't go near the door. She nodded once. No panic, no collapse, just readiness. Cole watched as she tucked the knife into the fold of his wool shirt again. Then he turned back to the window. Minutes later, shapes appeared through the trees. 3 men on horseback, moving slow and deliberate across the ridge, scanning the snow-covered ground. They weren't guessing anymore. They knew exactly where she had gone. Cole's breath tightened. 3. Could be more, he said under his breath. Say a step closer, voice steady. If they come for me, I'll face them too. No, Cole said firmly, turning to her. You survived them once. That's enough. You stay behind me. Saya swallowed, emotion gathering in her throat. She didn't argue this time. She saw the seriousness in his eyes and understood what it meant. He wasn't doing this out of obligation or guilt. He was doing it because somewhere in the last few days, protecting her had become something he chose, not something he owed. The men circled lower, searching the cabin perimeter. Cole stood perfectly still, hand near the rifle, waiting. They stopped about 60 yards out. One man dismounted and bent to inspect the snow. The others looked directly toward the cabin. Don't breathe loud, Cole murmured. Saya pressed her back against the wall, holding her breath as if the slightest sound could bring danger crashing through the door. The men spoke among themselves, their voices too faint to understand. Cole recognized the posture, the searching, the slow circling. They were trying to decide if approaching the cabin was worth the risk. They weren't lawmen. They weren't trackers. They were opportunists, the kind who chased vulnerability, not justice. Finally, after a long moment, the dismounted man straightened, spit into the snow, and swung back onto his horse. Cole watched every motion. Then the men turned, not toward the cabin, but away from it. They rode off slowly through the trees, following the lower trail south, their figures fading into the pale blur of snowfall. Cole didn't move until they disappeared completely. When he finally stepped back from the window, his shoulders relaxed in a long, quiet exhale. They're gone. Saya's breath broke sharply as relief surged through her. Her knees weakened and she braced herself on the table. Cole walked to her slowly, his steps heavy but steady. She looked up at him, eyes glossy with a mix of exhaustion and something deeper. You stayed, she whispered, even when they came this close. He reached out, brushing a strand of her hair away from her face. His touch was soft, careful, I'll always stay, he said, the words simple and final. Her breath trembled as she stepped forward, closing the space between them. She leaned into him, her hands resting lightly against his chest, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing. He lowered his head, pressing a slow, gentle kiss to her forehead first, letting her feel his steadiness. Then she lifted her face, and their lips met in a quiet, lingering kiss, slow, certain, shaped by days of fear, trust, silence, and shared survival. There was nothing rushed or hungry about it. It was the kind of kiss that said we made it, and I'm here now. When they finally parted, Saya looked at him with clear, steady eyes. Can I stay? She asked softly. Not for one night. Not because I need shelter, but because I feel safe with you. Cole's hands cupped her shoulders gently. You stay as long as you want, he said. And if you want it permanent, then we'll make it permanent. Her breath caught. You mean Mary? Yes, he said without hesitation. Two people choosing each other. No one forcing anything. Saya closed her eyes for a moment, overwhelmed but certain. I choose you, she whispered. Cole rested his forehead against hers, letting the warmth between them settle everything that had been uncertain for days. They married, quietly, 2 mornings later. No preacher, no witnesses, no ceremony, just the two of them standing in the fresh snow outside the cabin as the sun rose behind the pines. Cole slipped a simple ring, his late wife's old silver band, onto Saya's finger. Not to replace the past, but to honor how the present had changed him. I give this to you, he said, voice steady. And you give me you. Saya nodded, her voice soft but certain. I'm yours, because I choose it. He pulled her into a slow, warm embrace, the cold air drifting around them while the cabin stood quiet behind their backs. The same place where she had first collapsed in fear, now the place she would build a life. Inside, the fire burned steady. Outside, tracks led away, not toward them. And the land settled into a deep winter calm. The danger was gone. The questions were gone. What remained was simple. Two people who had been broken by the world, choosing each other and choosing to stay. A home built from survival, trust, and quiet love, and a future that finally belonged to them both.